Good evening and welcome to the CUNY Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. All right, we're going to do a quick overview here of World War I and the home front. All right, most people know about the causes of World War I, the mania, an acronym, the Zimmerman Note, unrestricted subwarfare, and so on. But the effect on the home front was pretty significant because this is going to be, in a lot of ways, a predecessor to the changes in the World War II home front as well. Okay, so first big change is financing the war. We got to figure out a way to pay for World War I. This is the first big scale war we're going to have since the Civil War. So the country went on a lot of campaigns. One was called the 100%ism, which was basically a push to make people assimilate into the American culture, try and get English as the only language, adopt American social customs, and so on. Might sound familiar to some things you're hearing now. Meatless Mondays was a way to just show that you were making a sacrifice, so you saved the meat for the soldiers. Lightless Tuesdays was a way to conserve energy. Also, during this time, as you might have done last weekend, we changed the clocks so we could do daylight savings time to conserve energy as well. And then victory gardens, where citizens would grow food like on a local street corner, and then the food that they would grow would then be donated to the troops and supported that way. So kind of putting citizens to work to help the soldiers out. All right, taxes obviously increased. Remember, the income tax is brand new, so that's going to be raised to finance the war. This is when we start to see the inheritance tax come into play, which was called an estate tax, which basically taxes your estate when you die. So some of that money would go to the government before it gets passed on to your heirs. And they started taxing liquor, tobacco, movie theater tickets, kind of luxury items. Remember, movie theaters are brand new. We're kind of in the era of the silent film. So these are kind of luxury things that the rich were doing. They needed to get more money for that. All right. Citizens would make private contributions, and then Liberty bonds, which you see the ad for over here, which citizens would basically buy a bond from the government, get the notion that they're being patriotic, support our war effort, and then get a return on that later on. Okay, managing the economy. All right, this is where the government is going to start taking a huge role in the economy. We saw it with in the progressive movement. This is going to continue even more so during World War I. Okay, new agencies were created to control the flow of raw materials. Right, we needed a bunch of raw materials. We needed this to produce weapons, other items for the war effort. So the government has to regulate that. All right, set production goals that companies would have to reach in order to produce bullets, tanks, things like that. Prices got fixed as a way to cut inflation, all right, because all of this stuff being in demand now, all right, now that the government is using so much of it, there was less for the consumers to produce. So as things became more in demand, the prices went up to accommodate that. So the government would fix prices and say, yeah, you might be able to get, $2,000 for a Ford Model T, but we're going to fix that at $1,500, even though it could be more. Okay, so this is kind of limiting how much money you could make, but the spirit of patriotism kind of limited the negativity to it. All right, union activities were curbed. All right, can't go on strike during a war; that would be considered unpatriotic. And obviously, the union said, "Hey, if we don't work, we don't have any materials for the war." Okay, food consumption was going to be reduced. We saw that with the meatless Mondays and other things like that to conserve food for the Allies. The War Industries Board, National War Board. Okay, Women in Industry Service, Fuel Administration, all these agencies each had their names are kind of self-explanatory, but they were the way the government could regulate what was going to be produced and what was going to be sold in the war effort. Okay, and this is kind of a government takeover essentially of the economy. So go into this war to fight for democracy and freedom, and some people would say we're kind of limiting our freedoms as far as what we could do. Okay, Bernard Baruch is the big guy you want to associate with this because he ran this on behalf of the government, Woodrow Wilson, to limit consumption, fix prices, and things like that. Okay, as far as loyalty goes, all right, big issue now. Have a ton of German immigrants in this country and fighting a war with them. So Congress passes an Espionage Act, which gave you a $10,000 fine and 20 years in prison if you interfered with the draft. That was considered espionage or spying. All right, sabotage Act, okay, if you worked against the government there. And then the Sedition Act prohibited you from interfering with war bond drives, recruiting efforts, or just speaking out against the government. This is going to be what is going to send Mr. Eugene Debs to prison yet again, okay? It's just basically suppressing any dissent that spoke out against the government, all right? The Sedition Act was tried in court in a case mentioned in the book called Shank versus United States. And this basically, the Supreme Court upheld a limit on your free speech because that speech could pose what was called a clear and present danger to the United States if you spoke out. Okay. German aliens were interned, okay, and members of the IWW were protested. Those are the Wobblies, because remember that was considered socialist, and those socialists were working against the war effort. So some of the Wobblies kind of got done on because they were protesting the war, and that didn't work for anybody. Okay, literacy tests were required for immigrants. All right, and we created a committee on public information. All right, in an attempt to control the news and other sources of info that were getting out, because obviously we want to let you know the war is going good and give you nothing but positive feedback. Okay. Now, President Wilson, this is a little known one that doesn't make many of the history books, passed an Alien Enemy Proclamation Act of 1917, okay? And these were 20 resolutions against any alien enemies. By alien, we basically mean Germans. So anybody that was 14 or older and not naturalized and a male, and this was eventually expanded to include women and Austria-Hungarian descent as well. These people were forbidden from owning a gun, operating an aircraft or any wireless apparatus. They couldn't enter Washington, D.C. for fear of sabotaging the government. They couldn't go to the beach, and they could not move to a new house. All right, so this was pretty limiting as far as what Germans could do that were not naturalized citizens. Wilson thought that the Germans were a collective threat to our safety and our security, so action against them was relevant. If you were making connections to class, well, I'll let you make that connection when you come to class tomorrow. This actually can connect to something in the future. In Cincinnati, they banned German literature from the shelves. Citizens were banned from schools and libraries. They didn't want to get any information on our country that could work against us. A gross violation of civil liberties, totally against what America stands for, and that law is annulled by December of 1918, which is after the war has ended. So that's probably, I don't hear much about it. It didn't even really last a year, but it just shows you how anti-German we got to limit what we could do. All right, women and minorities take a huge role in the war effort. We've already seen them get the right to vote in 1920. That's after the war, and it's because of what they did. That's why Wilson shifted his position. All right, there was a women's land army to get women working on the farms, fill in for some of these farmers that went off to work. Factories started to recruit African Americans, which brought us into the Great Migration, because we needed to get this workforce. All right, not a lot of African Americans signed up in the military, so they said this is our time to get out of the South, and we're going to move to these northern cities like Chicago, Cleveland, okay, Detroit, to get these jobs in this manufacturing belt to support the war effort. And Mexican Americans and women were also hired as industrial workers. So a lot of groups who traditionally had not worked in factories and lived in urban areas were starting to be brought up here for the war effort. All right. Governments stimulated patriotism among kids with the victory gardens, scrap drives, bandage rolling, savings bond drives. This is when we start saying the Pledge of Allegiance in the classroom. Okay, so this is a big propaganda push to get the kids involved. And you'll see a lot of propaganda posters. There were propaganda films to try and simulate the war effort, make the Germans kind of look like the bad guys, and really mobilize the population that way. So you see a big propaganda push. All right, and then I put the 18th Amendment up here, okay, which we know is prohibition, which would be a great word for the word wall. I believe temperance is up there already, but actually temperance isn't up there either. So maybe temperance and prohibition are words that should make our word wall. Temperance from things we've learned in the past, but then 18th Amendment and prohibition. All right, so whoever's after Taylor can get those words put up there on Wednesday. All right. Now, what does this have to do with World War I? I'm going to let you see if you can figure that out. If you're not sure what the 18th Amendment is, look it up and maybe figure out what is it about this that would be contributing to the war effort, because it was passed in 1918 in the midst of World War I. All right. Thank you for listening to the CUNY Academy, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Winter getting colder, summer getting warmer, tidal wave come across the Mexican border. Wide back gal and a sheep by the bear. singing Christmas carols.